When I think of what I really find appealing in video games, I usually think of interesting and multi-dimensional characters, a grand overarching story, unique worlds, and fun, interesting combat. Earthbound doesn't really have any of these qualities, but somehow I loved it anyways. It's honestly a little difficult to really express why, but I'll try my best. One of the things I think really made Earthbound click for me was just how grand of an adventure it felt. The main thing you're really doing is traveling through towns and cities, solving problems, and meeting people. It's a really simple concept, but it works very well here, and it gave me a very profound sense of progression. I love just thinking back on how far I'd come throughout my journey and how much further I had to go. I honestly really love the moments where the game just stops for a few minutes and acknowledges your progress while empowering you to move forward. And I think this feeling of progression is really helped by the setting. Unlike a lot of other games released around the time, Earthbound's world is based around a real location, America. And I think this locale really adds to the feeling of that grand journey because of how grounded to the world that I felt. As someone who grew up in an American suburb, the successive roads and houses made me feel almost nostalgic. It felt like a journey that I could really insert myself into, and Earthbound takes that American influence through and through with American-styled everything: department stores, burger joints, jazz music, healthcare. Before I go any further, I do feel as though I have to address sort of an elephant in the room, which is the combat. And I have to say that I'm really not a fan of it. In fairness, it was a system made for a different time, where a new game would have to last you weeks or months. And in that context, I understand why it was made this way. But the sheer number of random encounters, how much grinding, and just how long it all took almost made me quit the game entirely. So I decided to play with cheats on, and I'm really usually against this kind of practice, but I genuinely don't know if I would have finished the game without it, and I'm so glad to have reached the ending of Earthbound that I don't feel too distraught over it. But I feel that it is necessary to say that my experience was not entirely how the game was meant to be played. But really, I don't think combat was ever the memorable part of Earthbound. I found most of my enjoyment in the exploration of a new town, in the surreal scenarios and bizarre characters, in the music and the humor, and most of all, as I mentioned before, the feeling of being on an adventure. One thing I really can't wrap my mind around though is how Earthbound was ever a game meant for younger audiences. The humor is very adult, and the game has some really dark themes, like child abuse and neglect, cults and police brutality. It's all presented under a veil of whimsy that I guess could fly over most children's heads, but it was super apparent to me. But that veil gets weaker and weaker the more you progress until you finally reach the final boss of Earthbound, Gygus. And that's where any sense of whimsicality is lost completely, as you walk up a road of intestines to face a horror beyond comprehension. However, light soon shines through the darkness, and in my opinion, the most beautiful scene in Earthbound takes place. All of the people you've met along your journey lend you their strength in your time of greatest need. As you look backwards through your entire adventure retrospectively until you end up in the place where you started. And then the final prayer goes out to you, the player, the person who's been here for the entire ride. It's such a perfect scene that really encapsulates just how far you have come and represents so much of what Earthbound is about. And I really believe, along with this moment, the darker themes, adult humor, and just plain old strangeness are also a massive part of Earthbound's charm. And I think so much of its identity would have been lost without these themes. And I think that's the reason that Earthbound was so enjoyable to me and so many others. and why it inspired a generation of game developers. The impact Earthbound has had on some of my favorite games cannot be understated. I feel like a lot of modern game developers that grew up playing Earthbound each took a different piece of the game and made it into their own creation. So many of my favorite gaming memories might not have even happened without Earthbound's influence. I may have had some problems with Earthbound, but most of them are just simply because of its age. But even 26 years later, it's still an incredible game full of a lot of things I didn't even know I liked about video games. For that reason, I look at Earthbound as a grandfather to some of my all-time favorite games, and a completely unforgettable experience.
I miss you.